So the Las Vegas Raiders have their first game coming up against the New England Patriots in literally less than 1 week. And we got the first official depth chart coming out for the Las Vegas Raiders. And there's definitely some interesting changes that has kind of happened on this depth chart that a lot of us didn't really expect. Some guys have changed, some guys are kind of the same. The offense, for the most part, is basically the same unit that we kind of expected. You guys can see that no changes have really happened with the first team unit. Some things to note: Jackson Powers-Johnson obviously won the starting right guard. For most of camp, he was obviously listed as a guy who was in competition with Alex Kappa. It was always listed as Jackson Powers-Johnson or Alex Kappa. That's no longer happening. Obviously, JPJ has officially won the job. Another important thing to kind of keep in mind is that Amari Cooper is listed as a backup wide receiver to Jakobi Meyers. Now, obviously, if you have 5 wide receivers, any guy can kind of come in at any point, right? Jakobi Meyers can be swapped out for Amari Cooper, yes. But Amari Cooper and Jakobi Meyers will be out there together at the same point or at some same time over the course of a game. But it is an important note. Amari Cooper is listed as a backup. Some people thought he'd end up getting the start over a guy maybe like Dante Thornton, who, some Raiders beat reporters have described as a guy that's kind of struggled to actually make plays. Obviously, the Raiders have put a lot of trust in Dante Thornton. The guy obviously is one of the starting 3 wide receivers with the Raiders. But there's been some guys who have said, hey, he hasn't absolutely impressed in camp in terms of his hands aren't great. He's not an elite separator. He's not an elite route runner. There's things that Dante Thornton kind of struggles with, and some people have criticized him a little bit for that. Now, obviously, he's a rookie, so he'll develop and kind of get better. But some people actually thought that Amari Cooper was being brought in to potentially replace Dante Thornton. Now, we'll see the roles and kind of go forward. I'm not really surprised with the 3 guys that are listed as it is. Truth be told, I don't think this is going to change a whole lot with the wide receivers. And there's a good chance that come week 1, we actually see 2 guys play a lot more than another 2 guys, or 2 guys played more than these guys, or whatever ends up happening. But it is an important note to kind of keep in mind. Cooper is listed as a backup, which I think does obviously make sense. Jack Bech is going to be the 5th wide receiver for the Raiders. Geno Smith, Kenny Pickett are you going to be your 2 quarterbacks, right? Geno Smith's your 1. Kenny Pickett's your 2 at this point. You do have Cam Miller as a guy that spent time with the Raiders during preseason and all of camp. But he might not actually be our 3rd quarterback. The Raiders actually signed another quarterback, which we'll talk about here in a second. The Raiders also do have listed as their backup left tackle Charles Grant, which is not surprising. And they have Stone Forsythe as the backup right tackle. Now, some people actually asked this question to me. Is it possible that if Cole Miller goes down, that Charles Grant would actually play left tackle? As opposed to, do you have a true swing tackle situation kind of going on? I don't think this is a swing tackle type of situation. I do think that at this point, if Colt Miller were to go down, it would be Charles Grant. If DJ Glaze goes down, it'd be Forsythe. I think that just kind of makes sense. Again, not a huge deal. For the most part, the offense kind of stays the same. But it is on the defensive side that things swap a little bit. Things look a little bit different. Defensive line. If you guys remember, Thomas Booker was not listed as a starting defensive tackle for the Raiders or starting defensive lineman for the Raiders. For most of camp, it was Jonah Laulu that was listed as the starting quote-unquote defensive tackle for the Raiders. And that has flipped. The Raiders are basically telling us that they believe Thomas Booker should be the starting guy for the Raiders at this point. And I don't disagree with that. I actually do think Thomas Booker has flashed more in preseason than Jonah Laulu has. In fact, I'm not sold on Jonah Laulu. So early on in the process, when they were saying that, hey, Jonah Laulu may have taken the next step, even though we don't have Christian Wilkins anymore, watch out for this guy. This guy could actually be a good football player. Although that's what a lot of the reports kind of were, I did not ever buy into that. Jonah Laulu didn't really flash at all to me last season. So I didn't expect him to come into this year and just be so much better. It takes time to develop. So I'm not super shocked that Thomas Booker's the starting defensive tackle. And it's just kind of how the units listed. I also do think these 4 guys will be your main 4 guys. I think Tonga Hemingway may end up getting some reps where he ends up starting at some point. But I also do think that the Raiders defensive tackles are kind of weak this season. I know there's upside with guys like Thomas Booker, Jonah Laulu as well. I think he's technically still in year 3. There's upside with Tonka Hemingway and J.J. Pegues. There's upside with these guys, but upside is not, you're ready to go out there today, right? It's not the same thing. And I think the Raiders are at this point where our defensive tackles just don't look all that good. And we'll see what ends up happening when we go up against the New England Patriots. The Patriots have revamped their offensive line. It's a pretty good unit. The Raiders have a tough game coming up against the Patriots. I don't think it's going to be as... Now, I shouldn't even use the word easy, because the Patriots are not a terrible team, right? They're not like, I don't know what team's tanking, but they're not like a team like the Jets or a team like the Browns, right? The Patriots are looking to win the Super Bowl. Like, now they're starting to build that process. And the Raiders are that first team in the way for the Patriots. We're going to find out if this defensive tackle room has the potential to consistently get after the quarterback. I'm predicting that it's not going to be a great defensive tackle room. Now, I do think that there's a chance Tonka Hemingway ends up developing. And we know what we have with Adam Butler. So, like, one of the 2D tackles will still be solid. And we also have Tyree Wilson, who could technically rotate into that position. We'll see what ends up happening when that time kind of comes. But, right now it doesn't look good in my personal opinion. Linebackers, not a whole lot has changed. You have Jermaine Pratt and Landon Roberts, Devin White as your first three. You have Jamal Adams, Tommy Eichenberg, and Brennan Jackson is listed behind Devin White. Now, that one's kind of interesting in my opinion, because Brennan he's not a true outside linebacker the way Devin White is, or at least with the Rams, that wasn't the type of player he was. Jackson lined up as a pass rusher. I would think that the Raiders would take Brennan Jackson and say, hey, we're going to put you behind a Tyree Wilson or a Charles Snowden, but that was obviously not the case in this instance. So we'll see what role he actually plays for the Raiders. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. I don't know how much he'll even play, truth be told, but we'll see what ends up happening. The cornerback position is the big change for the Raiders. And this one shocked me. I'm not going to lie to you guys, man. When this actually came out, like the way it came out, I was surprised as hell. So Darien Porter is officially going to be a backup corner for the Raiders. And I'm not using backup in the terms of like he won't play. Obviously, Darien Porter is going to play a lot for the Raiders out there. I'm sure DeCameron Richardson will play a lot for the Raiders as well. But like Darien Porter being listed as a backup when this entire offseason, the entire training camp, everybody was hyping this guy up like he's the next great corner. He's the next Nnamdi Asomugha or whatever people are saying, right? The guy's not starting for the Raiders, and I'm actually happy that that's the case right now. Not because I don't like Darien Porter, but because, generally speaking, rookie cornerbacks struggle as they get into the NFL. It is great that the Raiders gave this guy all those first-team snaps because at some point, maybe it's during this season, maybe it's after this season going into next season, at some point, Darien Porter is going to become a phenomenal football player. I'm sure that'll end up happening. But for this season, I don't have that trust that our rookie corner is going to come in and compete and be that type of corner that we need. Now, with that being stated, Kai Blue Kelly has officially won the job for the Raiders, which is kind of interesting given the fact that this guy, like 6 weeks ago was not in the run to be a starter. I don't even know if he was on this roster 6 weeks ago, to be 100% honest with you guys. But Kai Blue Kelly has officially won the job for the Raiders. Eric Stokes was pretty much locked in from day one. Darien Porter was not locked in, and people were saying that, hey, who's going to be the opposite corner of Eric Stokes? We've rotated multiple guys. Cameron Richardson took some of those snaps. Early on, Jacorin Bennett, Sam Webb took some of those snaps. Obviously, that never really worked out for the Raiders. The Raiders obviously traded Jacorin Bennett, cut Sam Webb. But they tried figuring out who's going to be that corner opposite of Eric Stokes, and it looks like it's going to be Kai Blue Kelly. So we'll see what ends up happening as the season actually kind of comes around. We'll see if this guy can actually stick and hold down that roster spot. Of course, in terms of slot corner, Darnay Holmes is going to be listed as the starting slot corner for the Raiders. Now, it is also important to note that the Raiders did test Kai Blue Kelly on the inside as well. So if Thomas Harper struggles, I could see a situation where Kai Blue Kelly jumps inside and Darien Porter comes in on the outside. But also keep in mind, the Raiders are going to utilize multiple safeties on the field at once. They're going to get into that big nickel package. So it's not always going to be that, hey, you have to have a traditional nickel package where you have three corners on the field. Some of our defense will be two cornerbacks with three safeties as opposed to the other way around. All right, traditional nickel package is going to be three corners with two safeties. We'll have three safeties out there. And we've already kind of seen that in preseason. Jeremy Chin comes down into the box. He plays like that slot corner position. Isaiah Palamau ends up playing split safety with, early on it was Lonnie Johnson before he got hurt. Most recently it's been Chris Smith. We have Terrell Edmonds as well. And we also picked up Tristan McCollum. So We'll figure out what the rotation is going to look like as we kind of go forward. You know, one of the things that some people did say to me on social media, and I want to kind of just talk about it a little bit before we get into a signing and cut that the Raiders made yesterday. One of the questions that someone had for me is, what are your thoughts on all the turnover that's kind of happened with the Raiders, specifically in the secondary? Right, we've seen a lot of different guys kind of rotate in recently. We've seen a lot of guys cut. It kind of feels like the Raiders' defensive backs are like a revolving door, right? It feels like we have yet to figure out who's going to be that starting caliber unit. Most teams around the NFL, right? Not every single one, but most teams, especially playoff caliber teams, they know who the 4 or 5 guys are going to be pretty much from day one. It's for the good teams, it's rare that those aren't the 4 or 5 guys. For the Raiders, it's kind of felt like we've had so many different guys come in and out at this point. We've had like 6 different cornerbacks try winning that job. With Darien Porter try taking that job. We've had multiple safeties, and keep in mind the safety aspect of it. And I know people are going to say, hey, well, Isaiah Paul-Lamau, Jeremy Chin have been your 2 starters, and that's been the same, which is true. But the Raiders use the big nickel package, so we have 3 safeties that we need. And yes, you can't predict injury with a guy like Lonnie Johnson, but Lonnie Johnson wasn't here 9 months ago. He wasn't here last year. He's still technically new to this roster as well. And when he got hurt, you'd expect, okay, maybe they have a 4th safety that they can trust. And Chris Smith was kind of that guy, but they've signed 2 guys. Chris Smith hasn't been able to really hold it down. They brought in Terrell Edmonds. They brought in Tristan McCullum. And it still feels like they're not 100% set with that unit. And even then, we brought in some defensive linemen. We brought in some linebackers. We signed Jamal Adams late, right? So we'll see, how the Raiders kind of react as things kind of go forward. I don't expect this defense to be a team that's going to lead the Raiders. This is supposed to be an offensive-driven team. And even with the offense, there's some rookies out there. There's some question marks at center, at right tackle. We don't know if Dont'e Thornton's the guy or not. Right? I know he may develop into it, but today, the New England Patriots have starting caliber players out there. They have starting corners that are going to hit Dont'e Thornton in his mouth, that are going to run right at, Kai Blue Kelly and, right at some of these guys like Thomas Booker. How are these guys going to react? We'll find out, right? Literally in 5-6 days from now. I should also just kind of throw this out there. Trey Tucker is listed as your kick returner and punt returner, which is interesting because I thought Dylan Labe would definitely get one of those jobs. But Labe did win a job based off of what he does on the special teams on the defensive side. So every time we kick the ball, we punt the ball. Labe obviously looked really, really good in over the course of preseason. So we'll see how just things kind of develop as we go forward. Finally, just a quick little update. The Raiders did make 2 moves. These are moves where you're not bringing these guys back to the practice squad. These guys are gone. They're not coming back. One of them is linebacker Matt Jones, who I believe was a rookie this year. And the other was safety Trey Taylor, which I did not see really coming. I thought Trey Taylor would end up having a role with the Raiders, and I thought that he'd be a guy that they just end up kind of keeping around at this point. Now, I felt like he had a terrible preseason. He did not flash at all. He was always just half a step slow. But the fact that the Raiders had initially signed him back to the practice squad, I thought he'd be a guy that they'd ultimately just kind of keep around. But they decided to release him. And they signed 2 guys that they're not safeties, right? So, you release Matt Jones. They went out there and they signed veteran linebacker Brian Asamoah. I think that's how you say his name. I'm pretty sure that's how you say it. They went out there and they signed him. And what's interesting about this guy was I believe he's like a 2nd, 3rd round pick of the Minnesota Vikings. He was pretty good his rookie year. I remember breaking down his tape on the Football Scout channel. He was pretty solid, right? I didn't feel like this guy was a bad football player. But he was on the smaller side. He never really just developed. And obviously the Vikings also switched defensive coordinators. I forget who their defensive coordinator was 3 or 4 years ago. But they obviously brought in Mike Flores and just really never worked out. Now, on the other side, they also brought in a quarterback in Jeff Driscoll, an absolute veteran. Talk about experience. And this one's interesting as well because you obviously have Kenny Pickett, who's still technically a younger quarterback. I think this is his 4th year. You have Cam Miller, the rookie, and now you bring in Jeff Driscoll. And this almost makes me think, not that the Raiders are going to cut Cam Miller. I don't think that's happening. But remember, we spent a 5th round pick on Kenny Pickett. That guy's going to be here for the next couple of seasons. You're bringing in Jeff Driscoll, a veteran. Does that mean this is going to be your quarterback that you're going to go in there and say, hey, if something happens, if we absolutely need someone out there, Driscoll, you're the guy that's going to hop in? Or are they still going to trust Kenny Pickett over a guy like Jeff Driscoll? I would still think you're going to trust Kenny Pickett, given he started a lot of games in the NFL already. But what's interesting about that is, if you already have Kenny Pickett, your third quarterback does not have to be a veteran. Of course, that is unless they have some sort of things they're trying to work in over the course of the season, and maybe they just feel like a veteran quarterback gives you a better quarterback and a better experience than someone that might be a rookie like Cam Miller. Maybe they need a quarterback that can just kind of run the scout team offense. That kind of makes sense to me. We'll see if that's actually what it is as we go forward. But we did release Matt Jones. We did release Trey Taylor. I don't think either of those guys are coming back at this point. We've signed a linebacker. We signed a quarterback. And, of course, we already kind of broke down the depth chart. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, man. What are you guys' thoughts? Are you guys surprised at all by any of these different guys? Do you guys think the Raiders are going to win this game against the Patriots? I want to know your guys' thoughts in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.